She was closing the bakery at 4 a.m. when the millionaire heard the lullaby from his pocket watch and froze. The ancient cash register gave its familiar ding as Rachel Donovan closed out another night at Donovan's bakery. 4 in the morning. Same as always, the streets of Queens lay empty, except for the occasional taxi cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, its headlights sweeping across the flour-dusted windows of her small shop. Rachel moved through her closing routine with practiced precision, wiping down the marble countertop her adoptive mother Helen had saved for months to buy, stacking the day-old pastries in boxes for the homeless shelter. Switching off the display case lights one by one, the familiar weight of exhaustion settled into her bones. But it was the good kind. The kind that came from honest work, from feeding people, from carrying on a tradition Helen had started 23 years ago when she'd first opened this place. The last thing she always did, without fail, was pull out the antique pocket watch from her apron. It was tarnished silver, worn smooth by decades of handling, and when she pressed the tiny button on its side, it played a haunting melody, a lullaby she'd hummed along to since childhood, but had never been able to place. Helen always said it had been with Rachel when she'd found her, clutched in the 5-year-old's tiny fist like a lifeline. "Your mama must have loved you something fierce to give you such a beautiful thing," Helen used to say, her Irish accent thick with emotion. Music box watches like that don't come cheap. Tonight, as every night, Rachel listened to the full melody, 37 seconds of bittersweet notes that seemed to echo with memories she couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes she felt like she was standing at the edge of something important, like the tune was trying to tell her something just beyond her understanding. She locked up the bakery and stepped onto Northern Boulevard, her breath visible in the crisp October air. The city never truly slept, but at this hour, it came close. Just her footsteps on the pavement and the distant hum of traffic from the expressway. 15 miles away in Manhattan, Jonathan Blake loosened his silk tie as he stepped out of the gleaming elevator on the 42nd floor. The emergency board meeting had run until nearly 4 a.m. Another crisis, another fire to put out in his pharmaceutical empire. At 52, he'd built Blake Industries into a Fortune 500 company, but success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. His reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls showed a man who looked every one of his years. Gray had crept into his dark hair. Lines etched themselves around his green eyes. And somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten how to smile genuinely. 23 years of searching, of hoping, of having his heart broken by false leads and cruel hoaxes, had taken their toll. The building's lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel, his footsteps echoing as he walked toward the exit. His driver was waiting, but Jonathan waved him off. He needed air, needed to walk, needed to feel something other than the numbness that had become his constant companion since that terrible day in 1987 when his world had shattered. Central Park was too far, so he walked the empty streets of Midtown, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete. The city looked different at this hour, vulnerable somehow, stripped of its daytime armor of noise and crowds. It reminded him of another early morning. 23 years ago, when he'd walked these same streets after getting the call that his 5-year-old daughter Olivia had vanished from Riverside Park. Victoria had been dead for 2 years by then. Cancer had taken her when Olivia was just 3, but their daughter had been the light that kept him going. Golden curls, green eyes like his own, and a laugh that could fill their entire Park Avenue penthouse. She'd loved fairy tales and chocolate chip cookies, and the lullaby Victoria used to sing, some old Irish tune Victoria's grandmother had taught her. The investigation had consumed his life. Private detectives, FBI consultants, psychics, and charlatans. He'd tried everything, spent millions, followed leads to dead ends in 47 states. For the first 10 years, he'd never stopped believing she was alive somewhere. The second 10 years, hope had given way to obsession. The last 3 years, he'd finally accepted what everyone else had been telling him. Olivia was gone. His feet had carried him east without conscious thought, and now he found himself in an unfamiliar neighborhood in Queens. Working class. The kind of place where people got up before dawn to make an honest living. The kind of place where his daughter might have grown up if things had been different. That's when he heard it. The melody drifted through the night air like a ghost. Faint, but unmistakable. Jonathan stopped dead in his tracks, his heart slamming against his ribs. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But there it was. The same haunting lullaby Victoria used to sing to Olivia every night. The one she'd hummed while braiding their daughter's hair. The one she'd recorded in a music box for Olivia's 4th birthday. His hands shook as he followed the sound, walking faster, then running toward a small bakery where a young woman was locking up. She was petite, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a flour-dusted apron over jeans and sneakers, and in her hands was an antique pocket watch, still playing that impossible, heart-stopping melody. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice hoarser than he'd intended. The woman looked up, startled, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. The breath left his lungs in a rush. Those eyes, they were green, the exact shade of his own, the shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her chin, even the way she stood with one hip cocked slightly to the side. It was like looking at a feminine version of himself, or at Victoria when she'd been young. "Sir, we're closed," she said, taking a step back toward the door. Her voice carried a slight New York accent, but underneath it was something else, something that made his chest tight. "That song," he managed to say, pointing at the watch with a trembling finger. "Where did you get that watch?" Rachel's grip tightened on the timepiece. "I'm sorry, but that's none of your business. Look, if you want to buy something, we open at 6. Otherwise, my wife used to sing that song." The words tumbled out of him. "To our daughter, every night before bed. It's an old Irish lullaby. Mo store, mo crowy. My treasure, my heart. I haven't heard it in 23 years. Something flickered in her expression. Confusion, maybe recognition. She looked down at the watch, then back at him. "You're mistaken. It's just an old music box. I've had it since I was little." "What's your name?" he asked, stepping closer despite her obvious discomfort. Rachel Donovan, and you need to leave, mister. I don't know what kind of game you're playing." "But, Donovan," he repeated the name like a prayer. "When were you born? What's your birthday?" What the hell kind of question is that? But her voice wavered now, uncertain. Jonathan pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, scrolling to a photo he'd carried for 23 years. His daughter's last school picture, taken 2 weeks before she disappeared. Olivia Blake, age 5, gap-toothed smile, green eyes shining with mischief. "This is my daughter," he whispered, holding out the phone. "She disappeared 23 years ago. Her name was Olivia. She'd be 28 now." Rachel stared at the photo, her face going pale. The pocket watch slipped from her fingers, clattering to the sidewalk, its melody cutting off abruptly in the sudden silence. "That's impossible," she breathed, but her voice was barely a whisper now. That can't be." Jonathan knelt and picked up the watch, handling it like the precious thing it was. When he looked up, tears were streaming down Rachel's face, and he knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that after 23 years of searching, he'd finally found his daughter. The empty street suddenly felt like the center of the universe, and all the years of pain and searching and loss collapsed into this single impossible moment. His little girl was alive. She was standing right in front of him, grown up, beautiful, and terrified. "Olivia," he whispered. She shook her head violently. No. My name is Rachel. I'm Rachel Donovan, and you're crazy, and I need you to leave me alone." But even as she said it, her hand went to her left shoulder, unconsciously rubbing at a spot just below her collarbone, exactly where Olivia had a crescent moon-shaped birthmark. Rachel's apartment above the bakery had never felt smaller. She paced the narrow living room, her mind spinning like a tornado, while Jonathan Blake sat stiffly on her second-hand couch, looking completely out of place among her thrift store furniture and Helen's hand-crocheted doilies. "This is insane," she muttered for the 10th time, running her hands through her hair. "You can't just show up at 4 in the morning and tell someone their entire life is a lie." "I know how it sounds," Jonathan said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "But Rachel, look at me, really look." She stopped pacing and turned to face him, in the harsh fluorescent light of her kitchen. The resemblance was even more striking. The same stubborn jawline, the same way their left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right when they were thinking. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed her what she might look like as a middle-aged man. "Coincidences happen?" she said, but her voice lacked conviction. People can look alike without being related. Jonathan reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, faded photograph. This was taken the day before Olivia disappeared, at the Central Park Zoo. She insisted on feeding the sea lions, even though she was terrified of them. Rachel's breath caught. The little girl in the photo was wearing a yellow sundress. Her golden curls caught in the wind, and she was laughing at something off camera, but it was her left arm that made Rachel's knees go weak. There, just visible at the edge of her sleeve, was a dark mark shaped like a crescent moon. "I don't..." Rachel's hand went instinctively to her own shoulder, to the birthmark she'd always been self-conscious about. Helen used to call it her moon kiss, and say it made her special. "Show me," Jonathan whispered, with trembling fingers. Rachel pulled down the collar of her t-shirt, exposing the mark that sat just below her left collarbone. It was about the size of a quarter, dark brown against her pale skin, curved like a sliver of new moon. Jonathan's sharp intake of breath filled the silence. Olivia had the same mark, exactly the same. "Lots of people have birthmarks," Rachel said, but she was grasping at straws now, and they both knew it. Not like that one. The doctors called it café au lait spot, said it was unusual for the pigmentation to be so uniform, so perfectly crescent-shaped. Jonathan's voice was gaining strength, as if each detail he recited was another piece of evidence. And Olivia was allergic to shellfish. Severely allergic. Had to carry an EpiPen everywhere. Rachel's face went white. She'd discovered her own shellfish allergy at 12, when Helen had taken her out for her birthday dinner at Red Lobster. One bite of shrimp had sent her into anaphylactic shock. She'd carried an EpiPen ever since. "This is impossible," she whispered, sinking into the armchair across from him. "Helen found me outside St. Margaret's Church when I was 5. I was alone. Scared, wouldn't tell anyone my name or where I came from. The social workers thought I was traumatized, maybe abused. Helen was the church custodian, and she took me in when no one else would. Tell me about the memories," Jonathan said gently. "The ones that feel like dreams." Rachel's head snapped up. "How did you..." "Because Olivia lived in a penthouse with a rooftop garden. Victoria, my wife. She loved white roses, had them planted everywhere. The whole terrace smelled like roses in the summer." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, and she was there again. 5 years old, running through a garden that seemed to stretch forever, white petals falling like snow. The smell of roses so strong it made her dizzy. A woman's voice, gentle and loving, calling her name. Not Rachel. Something else. Something that started with an O. "Oh God," she breathed, pressing her palms against her temples. "Oh God, it's real, isn't it? The garden, the roses, the woman with the pretty voice who used to sing to me." "Victoria," Jonathan said, tears streaming down his face now. "Her name was Victoria, and she loved you more than life itself. She used to say you were her miracle baby, that she'd waited so long for you to come along. But Helen said..." Rachel's voice broke. "Helen said my parents didn't want me, that I was abandoned, left at the church like garbage. Helen was protecting you. She probably didn't know the truth herself." Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Tell me what you remember about that day." "The day Helen found you." Rachel closed her eyes, trying to summon memories that had always felt more like nightmares. "I was so scared. I remember being in a car for a long time, with a woman who kept crying. She kept saying she was sorry, over and over. And then she left me at the church steps. I had the watch and a teddy bear, a brown teddy bear with one missing eye." Jonathan's breath hitched. "Mr. Chocolate, that was his name. Victoria gave him to Olivia when she was 2. She took him everywhere. Helen kept him for me," Rachel whispered. "He's in my closet. I haven't looked at him in years because it made me too sad. But I couldn't throw him away." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 23 years of separation and pain. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "I need to call my private investigator. Marcus Webb. He's been working on Olivia's case since the beginning. We need DNA tests. We need to find out what happened, who took you, why..." "No." Rachel stood up abruptly. "No, I can't. This is too much, too fast. I need time to think. Rachel, please, I've been looking for you for 23 years. I've followed dead ends from California to Maine. I've been scammed by psychics and fortune tellers and people claiming to have seen you. I've buried hope so many times I thought I didn't have any left. But you're here. You're alive. You're my daughter. I'm Helen's daughter, Rachel said fiercely. She raised me. She loved me. She sacrificed everything for me. She worked double shifts at the diner to pay for my school supplies. She taught me to bake, to be kind, to work hard. She's my mother, and she always will be, Jonathan said quickly. I'm not trying to replace her. I could never replace her, but Rachel, you're my blood. You're all I have left of Victoria. Please, just let me prove it. Let me show you that you belong somewhere. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo of little Olivia still clutched in her hand. Finally, she looked up at Jonathan. The woman who took me, in the car. Do you know who she was? We had suspects. Linda Harper was our nanny's replacement. She'd only been with us for 3 months when you disappeared. The police questioned her, but she had an alibi. Said she was visiting her sick mother in Connecticut. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but I never trusted her. There was something in her eyes, something desperate. She'd lost her own daughter in a car accident 2 years before she came to work for us. What happened to her? I don't know. She disappeared a few weeks after you did. Just vanished. The police assumed she was scared. Thought she might be suspected. Jonathan met Rachel's eyes. But if she took you, if she's the one who left you at that church, I need to find her. I need answers. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this my way, at my pace. And Helen has to know everything. I won't lie to her, and I won't let you push her out of my life. Of course, Jonathan said immediately. Whatever you need. Rachel looked down at the watch in her palm, its silver surface catching the light. Why did she keep this, if someone took me? Why let me keep something that could identify me? Maybe she wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe she was scared too. Or maybe... Jonathan paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. Maybe somewhere deep down, she wanted you to find your way home, outside. Dawn was beginning to break over Queens, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Soon the city would wake up, the bakery would need to open, and Rachel would have to pretend that her world hadn't just turned upside down. But first, there was a phone call to make. Helen deserved to know that the little girl she'd saved 23 years ago wasn't an abandoned orphan. After all, she was a stolen daughter, finally coming home. The DNA results came back on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Marcus Webb, Jonathan's private investigator. To the small office above Donovan's bakery, Rachel had insisted on meeting there rather than at Blake Industries. She needed the familiar smell of cinnamon and rising dough to keep her grounded while her world continued to shift beneath her feet. 99th on the 97% probability of paternal relationship. Marcus read from the lab report, his weathered face showing no surprise. After 30 years in the business, very little shocked him anymore. Congratulations, Mr. Blake. You found your daughter. Jonathan closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 23 years. Across the small table, Rachel stared at the official document as if it were written in a foreign language. So it's real, she whispered. I'm really her. I'm really Olivia Blake. You're Rachel Donovan, Helen said firmly from her spot by the window. She'd insisted on being present for the results, her protective instincts on high alert. You're the little girl I found crying on those church steps. And you're the woman who bakes the best sourdough in Queens. A piece of paper doesn't change that. Helen's reaction to the news had been complicated. There was grief. For the family Rachel had been torn from. For the years of lies she'd unknowingly perpetuated. But there was also fierce protectiveness. And, if Rachel was being honest, a hint of fear that she might lose the daughter she'd raised. Helen's right, Jonathan said quickly. You're both people. You always have been. But Rachel, there's so much I want to tell you. So much about your mother. About your early childhood. I've been having dreams, Rachel interrupted, her voice barely audible. Ever since that night when you found me, or when I found you, whatever. They're not really dreams, though, are they? They're memories. She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where her bakery customers were starting to line up for their morning coffee and pastries. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the woman who served them croissants was having an identity crisis of epic proportions. Tell me about them, Jonathan said gently. Rachel closed her eyes, and she was 5 years old again, running through memories she'd buried so deep she'd convinced herself they were just dreams. There's a big room with tall windows and toys everywhere, expensive toys, a dollhouse with real furniture, a rocking horse with a real leather saddle, and books. So many books. Someone used to read to me every night. She paused, pressing her fingertips to her temples. A woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. She smelled like roses and vanilla, and her voice was like music when she read. Victoria, Jonathan breathed. She read to you every night. Goodnight Moon, The Velveteen Rabbit, all the classics. She said she wanted you to love stories as much as she did. The memories came faster now, flooding back like a dam had burst. She used to braid my hair in the mornings, French braids that took forever, but I loved sitting still for her because she'd sing while she worked. That song from the music box. But other ones too. Disney songs. Lullabies. Sometimes just making up silly rhymes about what we were going to do that day. Jonathan was crying now, not bothering to wipe away the tears. You used to call her Mama Tori. You couldn't say Victoria when you were little. Mama Tori, Rachel repeated. And suddenly she could hear her own 5-year-old voice saying those words. Could see a woman's face lighting up with joy every time she said them. Oh God, she's really gone, isn't she? My real mother is dead. She died when you were 3, Jonathan said softly. Ovarian cancer. She fought so hard, held on longer than the doctors thought possible, because she couldn't bear to leave you. In the end, she made me promise to make sure you always knew how much she loved you. Helen moved from her spot by the window and sat beside Rachel, taking her hand. You can love them both, sweetheart. Love isn't a finite resource. You can grieve for the mother you lost and still be grateful for the life we built together. But I don't remember her dying, Rachel said, confused. In my memories, she's always there, reading, singing, braiding my hair. Children's minds protect them sometimes, Marcus interjected gently. He'd seen this before. Traumatic memories buried so deep, they became inaccessible. You might have blocked out the painful parts and only held on to the good ones. What about after she died? What was my life like then? Jonathan's face darkened. You withdrew for a while. It was understandable. You'd lost the most important person in your world. I hired nannies to help, but you didn't connect with any of them until Linda Harper came along. Linda Harper, Rachel repeated. The name sent ice water through her veins. She's the woman from the car, isn't she? The one who kept crying and saying she was sorry. We believe so, Marcus said. I've been tracking her movements after she disappeared. It wasn't easy. She went off the grid completely. But I found records of her visiting a psychiatric facility in Connecticut, where her mother was a patient. Turns out her mother died 3 weeks before Linda started working for your family. So she lied about that too, Jonathan said bitterly. People in grief don't always think clearly, Helen said quietly. I'm not excusing what she did, but loss can drive people to desperate acts. Rachel stood and began pacing again, a habit she'd developed since this nightmare began. I remember her. I think dark hair, always looked sad. She used to watch me play, but not in a normal way, like she was studying me, or like she was seeing someone else. Her daughter was named Emma, Marcus continued. Died in a car accident when she was 4, hit by a drunk driver while Linda was at the grocery store. Linda blamed herself, went into a severe depression, lost her job, her apartment, everything. So she decided to steal someone else's child to replace the one she lost. Rachel's voice was sharp with anger. It's not that simple, Marcus said. From what I've pieced together, Linda didn't plan to keep you permanently. She took you intending to ask for ransom money she probably planned to use to start over somewhere else, but something went wrong. What do you mean? Jonathan asked. Marcus pulled out a thick file folder. I've been going through old case files, cross-referencing with current investigations. Remember your head of security back then, Frank Kowalski. Of course, he'd been with the family for 15 years. Frank had gambling debts, big ones to some very unpleasant people. Marcus opened the file. I think Linda gave him the ransom note to deliver to you, but Frank intercepted it, probably hoping to buy himself more time with his creditors by making the whole thing go away. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You're saying Frank let Olivia stay missing to save his own skin? Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. I'm saying Linda waited for a response that never came. Days turned into weeks, and she was stuck with a traumatized 5-year-old who kept crying for her daddy and Mama Tori. Linda's mental state was already fragile. The stress probably pushed her over the edge. Rachel sank into her chair, overwhelmed. So she kept me for 2 years. What was that like? I don't think it was abuse, Marcus said carefully. From what I can determine, Linda genuinely cared for you. She probably convinced herself she was saving you from something, or that you were better off with her. But she was mentally unstable, probably moving you around frequently to avoid detection. Is that why I don't remember much from that time? Rachel asked. Trauma, instability, and your young age all factor in, Marcus replied. But I suspect Linda eventually realized she couldn't keep you forever. Maybe she had moments of clarity where she understood what she'd done was wrong. So she left me at the church. Rachel finished. It was probably the kindest thing she could do at that point, Helen said softly. She made sure you were somewhere safe, somewhere you'd be found and cared for. Rachel looked at Jonathan, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected in his eyes. What happened to Frank Kowalski? He died 5 years ago, Marcus said. Heart attack, never confessed to anything. But I found evidence of large cash deposits to his account around the time of your disappearance. Money that came from some very questionable sources. So we'll never know for sure what happened to that ransom note. No, Marcus admitted. But it's the only theory that explains why Linda held on to you for so long without making contact. Rachel stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the street where she'd lived her entire remembered life. Everything felt different now. Not just the big things, but the small ones too. The way the morning light hit the buildings, the sound of traffic, even her own reflection in the glass. She was looking at the world through different eyes now. Eyes that had seen a penthouse garden, and a mother who'd loved her enough to fight death itself, just to stay with her a little longer. I want to see her, she said suddenly. See who? Jonathan asked. Linda Harper. I want to talk to the woman who stole my life and gave me a different one. I need to understand why she did it. And I need to hear her say she's sorry for real. Not just in my fragmented memories of a car ride when I was 7 years old. Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital sat like a fortress of red brick and barred windows on the outskirts of Hartford, Connecticut. Rachel pressed her face to the car window as Jonathan's Mercedes wound up the circular drive, watching patients in hospital gowns walking slowly through manicured gardens under the watchful eyes of orderlies. You don't have to do this, Jonathan said for the 10th time since they'd left New York. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Marcus could interview her. Get the information we need without putting you through this. I need to see her face, Rachel replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to understand what kind of person steals a child and then abandons her at a church 2 years later. Helen shifted in the back seat, her protective instincts on high alert. She'd insisted on coming despite Jonathan's gentle suggestions that she might want to stay in Queens. Linda Harper destroyed enough of our family, she'd said firmly. She's not doing any more damage on my watch. Doctor. Elizabeth Santos met them in the hospital lobby. A petite woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She'd been Linda's primary psychiatrist for the past 15 years, ever since Linda had been found wandering the streets of New Haven in a catatonic state, clutching a child's stuffed animal and speaking only to ask if someone had seen her little girl. I have to warn you, Dr. Santos said, as she led them through a maze of sterile corridors. Linda's condition has deteriorated significantly over the years. She has good days and bad days, but even on her good days, she often confuses past and present. She might think Rachel is still 5 years old, or she might not recognize her at all. What exactly is wrong with her? Rachel asked. Severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and what we now believe is early-onset dementia, possibly triggered by the psychological trauma of losing her daughter and the guilt over what she did to your family. Dr. Santos stopped in front of a heavy door with a small window. She spent most of the past 20 years convinced that she was protecting children from some unnamed danger. In her mind, she's a hero, not a criminal. Through the reinforced glass, Rachel could see a woman sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the garden. Linda Harper was 58 now, her dark hair gone completely silver, her face lined with years of medication and internal torment. She was thin, almost skeletal, and she rocked slightly as she sat, her lips moving in what looked like a conversation with someone only she could see. "She talks to Emma," Dr. Santos explained quietly. "Her daughter. Sometimes she talks to other children too. We think they're the children she believes she saved over the years. Though as far as we know, Rachel was the only child she actually took." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Saved. She kidnapped my daughter and traumatized her for life. In Linda's reality, she rescued Olivia from a father who didn't love her enough to pay her ransom," Dr. Santos said gently. "I'm not defending her actions, just explaining her mental state. She's constructed an elaborate fantasy to protect herself from the reality of what she did." "Can she stand trial?" Helen asked. "Can she be held accountable for what she did to our family?" "At this point, no. She's been declared mentally incompetent. Even if she weren't, the statute of limitations would protect her from most charges." Dr. Santos turned to Rachel. "Are you sure you want to do this? She might say things that hurt you, not because she wants to, but because her perception of reality is so distorted." Rachel squared her shoulders. "I'm sure." The room smelled like disinfectant and sadness. Linda looked up when they entered, her eyes focusing slowly on Rachel's face. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the vacant stare of someone lost in her own mind. Then something shifted, and Linda's face lit up with joy. "Olivia, my sweet girl, you came back to visit." Linda stood unsteadily and reached toward Rachel, who instinctively stepped back. "I was just telling Emma about you. She's been asking when you'd come home." "Linda, Dr. Santos said gently, "this is Rachel Donovan. She's grown up now. She has some questions for you." Linda's expression flickered with confusion. "Rachel, no. This is Olivia. My Olivia. Look at those green eyes, just like her daddy's." She turned to Jonathan, and for the first time, real fear crossed her face. "You came for her, didn't you? You came to take her back to that cold, empty house where nobody sings to her." "Linda," Rachel said softly, stepping forward despite her instincts. "It's me. It's Olivia. I'm grown up now. I need you to tell me what happened. Why did you take me from my father?" Linda's eyes darted between Rachel and Jonathan, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile past and present. "I saved you," she whispered. "Your daddy didn't want to pay for you. He didn't love you enough, but I loved you. I loved you like Emma." "Emma was your daughter," Rachel said gently. "The little girl who died in the car accident." At the mention of Emma's name, Linda's entire demeanor changed. She crumpled into her chair, her face crumpling with grief that was as fresh as if the accident had happened yesterday instead of 30 years ago. "It was my fault," she sobbed. "I left her in the car for just a minute. Just 1 minute to run into the store for milk. The parking brake. I thought I set the parking brake. But the car rolled into traffic and she... Linda couldn't finish the sentence, her body shaking with sobs. Rachel felt her anger wavering. This wasn't the calculating criminal she'd imagined, but a broken woman destroyed by grief and guilt. "After Emma died, I couldn't function," Linda continued through her tears. "I lost my job, my apartment, everything. I wanted to die too, but then I saw the job posting for a nanny with the Blake family and I thought, maybe I could be useful again. Maybe I could take care of another little girl. But that wasn't enough, was it?" Jonathan asked, his voice hard. "Taking care of Olivia wasn't enough. You had to steal her." Linda looked up at him with eyes full of pain and confusion. "You didn't love her enough. You worked all the time, left her with strangers. When Victoria died, you barely looked at her for weeks. She cried every night, asking for her mama, and you couldn't even comfort her." Jonathan flinched as if he'd been slapped. "I was grieving too. I lost my wife. But Olivia lost her mother, and then she was losing her father too. Bit by bit, day by day." Linda's voice grew stronger, more lucid. "I watched her getting sadder and lonelier, and it reminded me so much of Emma in those last months before she died. I couldn't let another little girl suffer like that. So you decided to kidnap her?" Helen's voice was ice cold. "I decided to save her," Linda corrected. "The ransom note was it was supposed to be temporary. I thought if Mr. Blake paid quickly, I could disappear and start over somewhere else. But days went by, then weeks, and no one came looking for her. No police, No FBI, nothing. Because we never got the ransom note, Jonathan said quietly. Linda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What do you mean? We never got your note. My security chief intercepted it. We searched for Olivia for months, years. I never stopped looking for her. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was Linda's ragged breathing. Then she let out a wail that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what did I do? You were looking for her. You did love her. I loved her more than life itself," Jonathan said, his voice breaking. "She was all I had left of Victoria." Linda rocked back and forth in her chair, her hands pressed to her temples. "I took care of her," she said desperately. "I sang to her. I read to her. I made sure she was safe. But she cried for you every night. Every single night for 2 years. She cried for her daddy. 2 years," Rachel said softly. "You kept me for 2 years. What was that like?" Linda looked at her with sudden clarity, seeing not the 5-year-old Olivia, but the grown woman Rachel had become. "You don't remember much, do you? Just fragments? Being scared, moving around a lot, you crying and saying you were sorry. We moved 17 times in 2 years, Linda said quietly. I was so paranoid that someone would recognize you, or that you'd remember enough to tell someone who you really were. I dyed your hair darker, cut it short, told people you were my niece whose parents had died. But I kept asking for my daddy. Every day, Linda confirmed. And every day, it broke my heart a little more, because I could see that what I'd done to save you was actually destroying you. You stopped laughing, stopped playing, stopped trusting anyone. You were wasting away right in front of me, just like Emma had. So you left me at the church, Rachel said. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. St. Margaret's was where I used to take Emma for story time, I thought. I thought if I left you somewhere safe, somewhere good people would find you, maybe you could have a chance at happiness again? Why did you let me keep the watch? Rachel asked, pulling the antique timepiece from her pocket. Linda's face softened as she looked at it. Victoria used to wind that watch every night and play the lullaby for you before bed. After she died, you carried it everywhere. You wouldn't let anyone take it away from you, not even to clean it or fix it when it stopped working. It was like a piece of your mother that you wouldn't let go of. You could have thrown it away. It was evidence that connected me to my real family. I tried, Linda admitted. The night before I left you at the church, I tried to throw it in a dumpster, but I couldn't do it. It was the only thing that still made you smile sometimes. Hearing that melody, I couldn't take that away from you too. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of a lawnmower in the garden outside. Finally, Linda looked up at Rachel with eyes that were suddenly, heartbreakingly lucid. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know that doesn't fix anything, doesn't give you back the years I stole, or heal the pain I caused. But I need you to know that I loved you. Not the way your real family loved you, but as much as my broken heart was capable of loving anyone. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to do the right thing sooner. Rachel felt tears running down her cheeks, but for the first time since this nightmare began. They weren't tears of anger or confusion. They were tears of understanding, of forgiveness. She hadn't known she was capable of feeling. I know, she said softly. I know you loved me, in your own way. You saved me too. The afternoon sun slanted through the barred windows of Linda's room, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of her memories. Dr. Santos had left them alone after Linda's initial confession, but remained nearby in case the emotional weight became too much for any of them to bear. Linda sat hunched in her chair, her silver hair catching the light as she rocked gently back and forth. The clarity that had emerged during her apology seemed to flicker like a candle in the wind, sometimes bright and focused, other times dim and confused. Tell me about the ransom note, Rachel said gently, settling into the chair across from Linda. What did it say exactly? Linda's eyes focused on some point beyond the window. I wrote it on hotel stationery, the Marriott on Lexington Avenue. We were staying there because I thought fancy hotels were safer somehow, less likely to ask too many questions about a woman traveling alone with a child. She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. The note said I had Olivia, that she was safe, and that you had 72 hours to leave $50,000 in a locker at Grand Central Station. I wasn't greedy. I just needed enough money to disappear, to start over somewhere far away where no one would look for us. $50,000, Jonathan repeated quietly. I would have paid 10 times that without question. I gave the note to Frank, Linda continued, her voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer. I trusted him because he'd always been kind to me, always asked about my day when I came to work. He seemed like a good man. What did Frank say when you gave it to him? Helen asked. He said he'd make sure you got it right away. He promised me that by the next evening, everything would be resolved. Linda's face crumpled. But hours passed, then days, and nothing happened. No police came to the hotel. No one was looking for us. It was like you didn't care that she was gone. Rachel felt her heart breaking for this broken woman, even as anger still simmered beneath the surface. So what did you do? I panicked, Linda whispered. I packed our things, and we started moving from hotel to hotel, city to city. I kept thinking that maybe the police were being subtle, that they were tracking us somehow. But weeks went by and still nothing. You weren't even in the news, begging for her return like parents usually do, because we never knew there was a ransom demand, Jonathan said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. We thought you'd taken her to hurt her, or sell her, or God knows what. The FBI treated it as a stranger abduction. They told us that in cases like that, if the child isn't found in the first 48 hours, they're usually dead, Linda finished, her voice barely audible. Oh God, what must you have gone through thinking she was dead? The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of mutual misunderstanding and pain. Tell me about those 2 years, Rachel said finally. What was our life like? Linda's expression shifted, becoming almost maternal as she looked at Rachel. You were so sad at first. You cried for your daddy every night, and sometimes you'd wake up screaming from nightmares. You kept asking when you were going home, when daddy was coming to get you. What did you tell me? I lied, Linda said simply. I told you that your daddy was sick and couldn't take care of you right now, but that he loved you very much and wanted you to stay with me until he got better. It was the only way I could think of to keep you from being completely heartbroken. Rachel felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. So you didn't tell me he didn't want me? Never, Linda said fiercely. I might have been crazy, but I wasn't cruel. I could see how much you loved him, how much you needed to believe he loved you back. I couldn't take that away from you. But I was still sad, Rachel prompted. Devastated, Linda confirmed. You stopped eating for a while, stopped playing with the toys I bought you. You just sat by windows, watching for a car that never came. It reminded me so much of Emma in those last months before she died, when she was sick and I couldn't fix her, couldn't make her better no matter what I did. Helen leaned forward. Is that when you started thinking about giving her back, not giving her back, Linda corrected. I still believed he didn't want her, remember? But I started thinking about finding her a better home, a family with children, where she wouldn't be so lonely. But you didn't, Jonathan observed. Linda's face twisted with guilt. Every time I tried to leave you somewhere, you'd look at me with those big green eyes and beg me not to leave you like everyone else had. You thought your mama had left you when she died. Then your daddy had left you. And now I was going to leave you too. How could I add to that abandonment? So instead you kept moving us around, Rachel said. 17 different cities in 2 years, Linda confirmed. I told myself I was keeping you safe, but really I was just running from my own guilt. We were both miserable. I was drinking too much, barely sleeping, jumping at every shadow, and you were fading away right in front of me. I remember being hungry a lot, Rachel said softly, and cold. We stayed in some pretty awful places. Linda's face flushed with shame. The money I'd saved didn't last long. I couldn't get a real job because I couldn't risk background checks or references. We ended up in shelters sometimes, or cheap motels that rented by the week. I tried to make it an adventure for you. Told you we were explorers discovering new places. Did I believe you? At first, you were only 5, and children want to believe the adults taking care of them. But as you got older, you started asking harder questions. Where were we going? When could we stop moving? When could you see your daddy again? And you still didn't have answers. I had the same answer every day. Soon. We'll stop moving soon. You'll see your daddy soon. Everything will be better soon. Linda wiped tears from her cheeks. But soon never came, and you started to realize I was lying. Is that when you decided to abandon me at the church? Linda flinched at the word abandon. I decided to give you a chance at a real life. You were 7 by then, old enough to remember being happy before, old enough to know that what we had wasn't normal. You'd started having nightmares again. But this time you were afraid of me too. Afraid of you. You'd caught me crying one night, talking to Emma. To the air, really. But you didn't know that. You heard me saying I was sorry, that I'd made a terrible mistake, that I didn't know how to fix it. You asked me what mistake, and I couldn't answer without telling you the truth about what I'd done. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. I remember that night. I hid under the covers because you seemed so sad and scared. I thought maybe you were sick, like Mama Tori had been. I was sick, Linda said quietly, just not in a way that doctors could fix. I was drowning in guilt and grief, and I was pulling you down with me. That's when I knew I had to let you go. But why St. Margaret's specifically? Helen asked. Linda's expression softened. It was where I used to take Emma for story time when she was little. The priests there were kind. And there was a woman, the custodian, who always had cookies for the children and who seemed to genuinely care about everyone who walked through those doors. Helen's breath caught. You saw me there. You knew I would find her. I watched you for 3 days, Linda admitted. I sat in my car across the street and watched you arrive early every morning. Watched how gently you spoke to the homeless people who came looking for help. How you always seemed to have time for anyone who needed it. I knew you'd take care of her. So you just left me there. Rachel's voice was small, like a child's. I waited until you were asleep in the car. Then I carried you to the church steps. You were wearing your favorite yellow dress, the one I'd bought you in Philadelphia because you said it was the same color as the sun. I left you with Mr. Chocolate and the music box watch, and I tucked a note in your pocket. What note? Rachel asked sharply. Helen never mentioned a note. Linda looked confused. There was a note. I wrote your real name on it, Olivia Blake, and your father's name and address. I thought whoever found you would call him and he'd come get you. Helen and Rachel exchanged glances. I never found any note, Helen said slowly. It was in the right pocket of your dress, Linda insisted. I put it there myself, folded it small so it wouldn't fall out. The dress was torn when I found her, Helen said, her voice growing thoughtful. The right pocket was actually ripped completely off. I assumed it happened when she was walking around scared and alone, or when someone removed it deliberately, Jonathan said grimly. Frank again. It's possible. Marcus's voice came from the doorway. They all turned to see the private investigator standing there with Dr. Santos. I've been going through Frank's old files, and there are some interesting discrepancies in his reports from that time period. What kind of discrepancies? Jonathan asked. He filed reports about homeless people being found on church property around that time. 3 separate incidents in 2 weeks, all at St. Margaret's. That's unusual. Typically, homeless individuals don't concentrate in one area like that unless there's a reason. You think he was watching the church? Rachel asked. I think he was cleaning up loose ends, Marcus said grimly, making sure nothing connected back to his interference with the ransom note. If Linda left a note with Olivia's real identity, Frank would have wanted it destroyed. Linda was staring at Marcus with growing horror. You mean he knew, all this time he knew where she was and he didn't tell Mr. Blake? It looks that way, Marcus confirmed. Linda let out a sound that was part sob, part scream. She doubled over in her chair, her whole body shaking with the weight of this new revelation. I could have brought her back, she whispered. If I'd just called myself instead of trusting Frank, I could have brought her back to you years ago. All those years of thinking you didn't want her. All those years of her growing up without her real family. And it was all because of him. The room fell silent, except for Linda's broken sobs. Rachel found herself standing, moving toward the woman who had stolen her childhood, and placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You couldn't have known, Rachel said softly. You were sick and scared and trying to do what you thought was right. Linda looked up at her with eyes full of anguish. Can you ever forgive me? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. thinking about the years of questions, the identity crisis, the family she'd never known she'd lost. But she was also thinking about Helen's love, about the community that had raised her, about the woman she'd become because of the path her life had taken. "I already have," she said finally. "You loved me the only way you knew how. And in the end, you made sure I was safe. That has to count for something." The drive back to New York was silent, except for the steady hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of Helen adjusting her position in the back seat. Rachel stared out the passenger window, watching the Connecticut countryside blur past, her mind spinning with everything Linda had revealed. The woman who had stolen her life had also, in a twisted way, saved it. The contradiction left her feeling emotionally exhausted. "You okay?" Jonathan asked quietly, glancing at her profile. "I don't know what I am," Rachel admitted. 2 weeks ago, I was just a baker from Queens with a mysterious past. Now I'm the lost daughter of a millionaire, and the woman who kidnapped me is a broken soul in a psychiatric hospital who thought she was protecting me." "You're still a baker from Queens," Helen said firmly from the back seat. "Money and bloodlines don't change who you are inside." But Rachel wasn't so sure anymore. Since learning the truth about her identity, she'd started noticing things about herself that she'd never paid attention to before. The way she naturally gravitated toward expensive fabrics when shopping, even though she couldn't afford them. How she unconsciously straightened her posture when entering fancy restaurants, as if some part of her remembered being raised in high society. The classical music that had always inexplicably moved her to tears now made sense. Victoria had played piano, Jonathan had told her, and had filled their penthouse with Mozart and Chopin. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told Jonathan as they crossed into New York State. "About wanting to know more about Victoria, about my early childhood, I think. I think I'd like to see the penthouse if that's okay." Jonathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Of course, I haven't changed much since. Well, since you disappeared, your room is exactly the same. I couldn't bear to pack it up." "You kept her room?" Helen asked, her voice soft with understanding. "For 23 years. Every toy, every book, every piece of clothing. The maid dusts it once a week. But otherwise..." Jonathan's voice trailed off. "I guess part of me always hoped she'd come home." 2 hours later, they stood in the marble lobby of one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential buildings. The doorman, a distinguished man in his 60s, did a double take when he saw Jonathan approach with Rachel. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake," he said, then stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fixed on Rachel's face. "My God, she has your eyes, sir, and something about the way she carries herself." "Hello, Patrick," Jonathan said quietly. "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Rachel. This is Patrick O'Brien. He's been the doorman here since before you were born." Patrick's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Olivia, is it really you?" Rachel felt overwhelmed by the recognition in the old man's face, the joy and disbelief mixing in his expression. Yes, I think so. You used to bring me cookies from the kitchen," Patrick said, his Irish accent thick with emotion. "Chocolate chip, always chocolate chip. You'd sneak them down in your little purse and share them with me during my lunch break." A memory flickered, standing on tiptoes to reach a marble counter, small hands stuffing cookies into a tiny pink purse. The thrill of having a secret mission. "You used to call me your little cookie fairy." Patrick nodded vigorously. "That's right. And you always asked me to tell you stories about Ireland, about the fairies and the leprechauns. Your mother said you were going to be a storyteller when you grew up." The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. Rachel stood between Jonathan and Helen, acutely aware of the growing distance between her two worlds with each floor they climbed. When the elevator opened directly into the Blake penthouse, she stepped into a life she'd forgotten she'd ever lived. The apartment was a testament to refined taste and unlimited resources. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. But what struck Rachel most was how cold it felt. Despite its obvious beauty, it was a showplace, not a home. "This was Victoria's favorite room," Jonathan said, leading them into a sun-drenched living room where a grand piano sat by the windows. "She used to play for hours, especially after dinner. You'd sit right there on that blue chair and listen, sometimes falling asleep to the music." Rachel approached the piano slowly, her fingers trailing across the keys. Without conscious thought, she began picking out a melody, something simple but hauntingly beautiful. The notes seemed to flow from some deep memory, and she found herself humming along. "That's for Elise," Jonathan breathed. "Victoria played that for you every night before bed. You couldn't have been more than 4 when you started humming along." "I remember," Rachel whispered. The memory suddenly crystal clear. A woman with gentle hands and kind eyes, sitting at this very piano, playing while the sun set over the park. She used to say music was the language of the heart. Victoria believed that if you could speak through music, you'd never truly be alone, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Helen had been unusually quiet, and Rachel turned to see her adoptive mother standing by the windows, looking small and out of place among the luxury surrounding them. "Helen, you okay?" "It's just, this is what you came from," Helen said softly. "This world of beauty and privilege, and I gave you a cramped apartment above a bakery and secondhand clothes from the church rummage sale. And you gave me love," Rachel said fiercely, crossing to take Helen's hands. "You gave me a work ethic and humility and the knowledge that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. This place is beautiful, but it's not home. You made me a home." Jonathan cleared his throat. "There's something else I want to show you." He led them down a hallway lined with family portraits, generations of Blakes looking stern and successful in their expensive frames. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a door that had been painted with flowers and butterflies, clearly the work of a child's imagination. "You painted this the week before you disappeared," he said, turning the handle. "You said every princess needed a castle door, and castles should be colorful." The door opened to reveal a little girl's paradise. The room was exactly as it had been 23 years ago. A canopy bed with pink curtains, shelves full of books and toys, a dollhouse that was a perfect miniature of the penthouse itself. Everything was clean and dust-free, preserved like a shrine to childhood innocence. Rachel stepped into the room and was immediately 5 years old again. She remembered jumping on that bed, remembered the way the afternoon light made rainbows on the wall through the crystal prism hanging in the window, remembered feeling safe and loved, and certain that her world would never change. "The dollhouse," she whispered, kneeling beside it. "I remember playing with this for hours, making up stories about the little family inside." "You used to move the dolls around and create elaborate adventures," Jonathan said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "There was always a mother doll, a father doll, and a little girl doll. They went on picnics and had tea parties and lived happily ever after." Rachel picked up the mother doll, a tiny figure with blonde hair and a blue dress. Something inside her chest cracked open, and suddenly she was crying. Not the angry, confused tears she'd shed over the past 2 weeks, but deep, grieving sobs for the mother she'd lost and barely remembered. "I miss her," she said through her tears. "I don't even really remember her, but I miss her so much it feels like drowning." Jonathan was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms for the first time since she was 5 years old. She stiffened at first, then gradually relaxed into the embrace that felt both foreign and familiar. "She loved you so much," he whispered into her hair. "Every day of her life, even when she was sick, even when she was dying. You were the first thing she thought about when she woke up, and the last thing before she went to sleep. Tell me about her," Rachel said, not pulling away from his arms. "Tell me everything." And so he did. He told her about Victoria's laugh, which sounded like wind chimes, and how she could never pass a flower shop without buying something colorful for the penthouse. He told her about the elaborate bedtime stories Victoria would make up, always featuring a brave little princess who looked exactly like Olivia. He told her about Victoria's terrible cooking skills, and how she once set off the smoke alarm making toast, and how she cried happy tears the first time Rachel called her Mama instead of Victoria. Helen listened from the doorway, and Rachel could see the pain in her eyes. Not jealousy, but the ache of knowing that no matter how much she loved Rachel, she couldn't give her back the mother who had been stolen by cancer and time. As the sun set over Central Park, painting the room in shades of gold and pink, Rachel made a decision. "I want to split my time," she said suddenly. "Between both worlds. I want to learn about the Blake family and Victoria and the life I should have had. But I also want to keep the bakery and the apartment in Queens, and the life Helen gave me." I don't want to choose between who I was and who I became. Jonathan nodded. Whatever you need, we can figure out the details later. And I want to do something for Linda, Rachel continued. I don't know what yet, but she's suffering in that place. And some of that suffering is because of what Frank did, not just what she did. You have a generous heart, Helen said proudly. Just like your mother, both of your mothers. As they prepared to leave the penthouse, Rachel took one last look around the room that had been frozen in time for 23 years. Tomorrow, she would start the complicated process of bridging her two lives, of being both Rachel Donovan and Olivia Blake. But tonight, she was just a daughter who had finally come home. 3 weeks had passed since the visit to Willowbrook, and Rachel found herself caught between two gravitational pulls that threatened to tear her apart. Mornings belonged to the bakery, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough, the comfort of flour-dusted hands, the steady stream of regulars who knew her as Rachel Donovan and nothing more. But afternoons increasingly drew her to Manhattan, to the gleaming offices of Blake Industries in the penthouse where memories lurked in every corner. Today was different. Today, Jonathan had asked her to come see something special, something that might help her understand Victoria better. Rachel stood in the penthouse's master bedroom for the first time, feeling like an intruder in what had been her parents' most private space. I haven't been in here much since she died, Jonathan admitted, opening the doors to an enormous walk-in closet. But I thought you might want to see this. The closet was a shrine to feminine elegance. Victoria's clothes still hung in perfect order. Designer gowns, tailored suits, cashmere sweaters in every color imaginable. But what caught Rachel's attention was a small section in the back corner, carefully preserved behind clear plastic covers. Maternity clothes, Jonathan explained softly. She kept them all, said she wanted to wear them again when we had more children. His voice caught. The cancer diagnosis came when you were 18 months old. More children became impossible after the treatments. Rachel reached out to touch a flowing blue dress, imagining Victoria wearing it while pregnant, planning for the future, believing in happy endings. She wanted more kids. She wanted a house full, said you needed siblings to play with, to fight with, to love. Jonathan pulled out a small photo album from a shelf. These are from when she was pregnant with you. She documented everything, every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, even took pictures of her changing body because she said she wanted to remember how it felt to carry you. The album was a love letter to impending motherhood. Victoria glowing in maternity photos, her hands always cradling her growing belly. Victoria painting the nursery walls while obviously pregnant. Determination and joy radiating from every image. Victoria holding tiny baby clothes, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She looks so young, Rachel whispered. 26 when you were born. She used to joke that she was going to be the cool mom who understood pop music and fashion trends. Jonathan turned the page to reveal photos of newborn Rachel, tiny and perfect, wrapped in a pink blanket, surrounded by flowers and balloons. She cried for 20 minutes the first time you grabbed her finger, said she couldn't believe something so perfect could be real. Rachel felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever she tried to grasp the magnitude of what had been stolen from all of them. What was she like as a mother in those early years before she got sick? Jonathan's face transformed, years dropping away as he lost himself in memories. She was magical. She talked to you constantly from the moment you woke up, narrating everything she was doing. Now Mama's making coffee and the sound is whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Look at the pretty bird outside, Olivia. He's saying good morning just like we are. She sounds wonderful. She was terrified she was doing everything wrong. Jonathan continued with a laugh. Called her mother 6 times a day, asking if you were eating enough, sleeping enough, developing fast enough. But with you, she was pure instinct and love. Rachel turned the page and found herself staring at a photo that made her breath catch. Victoria sat in the rocking chair that was still in the nursery, holding toddler Olivia, both of them laughing at something off camera. The child's face was bright with joy and trust, completely secure in her mother's arms. I remember this, Rachel said suddenly. Not the photo being taken, but this feeling, being completely safe, like nothing bad could ever happen as long as she was holding me. That's exactly what she wanted you to feel, Jonathan said softly. Even when she was sick, even during the worst of the treatments, she made sure you felt secure and loved. Tell me about when she got sick." Jonathan's expression darkened. "You were too young to understand what cancer meant, but you knew something was wrong. Victoria was tired all the time, had to go to the doctor more often. She lost her hair from the chemotherapy, and you were fascinated by her collection of scarves and wigs." Did I know she was dying? Not consciously, but children sense things. You became clingier, more anxious when she left your sight. You started having nightmares about monsters that would come and take people away. Jonathan's voice broke slightly. "Victoria made up a story about guardian angels to help you sleep. She said everyone had angels watching over them, and that even if she couldn't always be in the room with you, your angel would keep you safe." What happened at the end? Jonathan was quiet for so long that Rachel thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She held on longer than anyone expected. The doctor said she had weeks, maybe days, but she survived for almost 6 months after that diagnosis. I think she was afraid to leave you, afraid of what would happen to you without her. Were you there when she died? We both were. It was early morning, about sunrise. You were sleeping curled up next to her in the hospital bed. The nurses had bent the rules because Victoria insisted she wanted you close. She waited until you were deeply asleep. Then she squeezed my hand and just let go. Rachel closed the album, overwhelmed by the weight of a love she could barely remember, but that had shaped the first 3 years of her life. What was I like after she died? Lost, Jonathan said simply. You kept asking when Mama Tori was coming home, kept looking for her in every room. I didn't know how to explain death to a 3-year-old, didn't know how to help you grieve when I was barely functioning myself. Is that why you hired so many nannies? I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you needed stability, routine, someone who could focus on you completely while I tried to hold the business together and deal with the legal aftermath of Victoria's death. Jonathan sat heavily on the edge of the bed, but you didn't bond with any of them. You were polite, well-behaved, but distant, like you were protecting yourself from caring too much about someone who might leave, until Linda came along. Until Linda came along, he confirmed. She was different from the others. She seemed to understand your grief in a way the others didn't. She would sit with you when you cried, let you talk about Victoria, even helped you make a scrapbook of photos to remember her by. She was grieving too, Rachel said, understanding flooding through her. She saw her own lost daughter in me. I should have recognized the signs, Jonathan said bitterly. The way she looked at you, the way she talked about you being hers to protect. But I was so grateful that someone could reach you, could make you smile again, that I ignored the red flags. Rachel moved to the window, looking out at the garden on the building's rooftop terrace. Even in late autumn, she could see the skeletal remains of what had once been Victoria's rose garden. Can we go out there? The terrace was larger than she'd expected, wrapping around 3 sides of the building. The roses were dormant now, bare branches reaching toward the gray November sky. But Rachel could imagine how spectacular they must have been in full bloom. White roses were Victoria's favorite, Jonathan said, following her to the garden area. She said they represented new beginnings, pure love, hope for the future. She planted this garden when she found out she was pregnant with you. Rachel knelt beside one of the rose bushes, her fingers tracing the thorny stem. Suddenly, the memory hit her with stunning clarity. Summer morning, golden sunlight, the air heavy with the scent of blooming roses. A woman's voice, gentle and loving, careful of the thorns, little one. Even the most beautiful things need protection sometimes. She brought me out here in the mornings, Rachel said, the memory becoming stronger. Before breakfast, she said the roses smelled best when the dew was still on them. Every day in the summer, you had a little watering can, and she'd let you help tend the flowers. You took it very seriously, made sure every plant got exactly the right amount of water. She used to sing while we worked, Rachel continued. More memories flooding back. Not just lullabies, but pop songs, show tunes, sometimes just made-up songs about what we were doing. She had a terrible voice, Jonathan said with a laugh, completely tone-deaf, but that never stopped her from singing constantly. Rachel stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I want to restore this garden, not change it. Just bring it back to life, the way she would have wanted. Rachel, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she said firmly. I need to do this for her, For me, it's something I can give back, something I can do to honor the mother I barely remember, but who loved me enough to fight death for 6 extra months. As they stood among the dormant roses, Rachel felt something shift inside her. For weeks, she'd been struggling to reconcile her two identities, feeling torn between Rachel Donovan and Olivia Blake. But standing here, surrounded by the remnants of Victoria's garden, she realized she didn't have to choose. She was both women, shaped by both mothers. Victoria had given her the foundation of unconditional love that had sustained her through trauma and loss. Helen had built upon that foundation, teaching her resilience and kindness, and the value of honest work. "I want to plant white roses at the bakery too," she said suddenly. In the little space behind the building, Helen always said it was too shady for flowers, but I think roses might survive there. "A bridge between your two worlds," Jonathan said, understanding immediately. "Exactly," Rachel smiled, and for the first time since learning the truth about her identity, it felt completely genuine. Victoria's roses in both places, a reminder that love doesn't end just because someone dies, and that the people who shape us are always part of who we become. As they headed back inside, Rachel caught her reflection in the sliding glass door. She looked like herself, not Olivia Blake pretending to be Rachel Donovan, or Rachel Donovan trying to become someone else entirely. Just herself, finally comfortable with the complicated truth of who she was and where she'd come from. The pocket watch in her bag chimed the hour, its familiar melody no longer sounding like a lament for what was lost, but like a promise of what could still be found. Spring arrived early in New York, bringing with it the sound of Rachel's laughter echoing through the Blake penthouse for the first time in 23 years. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by financial documents and business plans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour still dusting her jeans from the morning shift at the bakery. "You want to do what?" Jonathan asked, looking up from the proposal she'd handed him. "Expand the bakery into a social enterprise," Rachel repeated, her eyes bright with excitement. "Not just one location, but a network of bakeries that specifically hire people who need second chances, former addicts, people coming out of prison, teenagers aging out of foster care, immigrants needing work experience." Jonathan studied the detailed business plan, impressed despite himself. "This is incredibly thorough. Where did you learn to put together financial projections like this?" "Community college business classes. Mostly, Helen always said I had a head for numbers, but I never thought I'd use it for anything bigger than balancing the bakery's books." Rachel leaned forward eagerly. "The profit margins work, Jonathan. Each location would be sustainable within 18 months, and the social impact would be enormous. The startup costs are substantial," he observed, though his tone was more thoughtful than dismissive. "I know. That's why I'm asking for your help, not just as my father, but as a businessman. I'm not asking for charity. I'm proposing a legitimate investment opportunity that happens to do good in the world." Helen entered from the kitchen carrying a tray of tea, shaking her head with amusement. 6 months ago, she was content making croissants for the morning rush. Now she wants to change the world one bakery at a time. "I've been thinking about what Linda said," Rachel explained, accepting a cup of tea from Helen. "About wanting to save people. She went about it completely wrong, but the impulse wasn't evil. Maybe this is my way of actually saving people, giving them skills, confidence, a path forward." Jonathan set down the proposal and looked at his daughter, really looked at her. The scared, confused young woman who'd stood outside her bakery 6 months ago had transformed into someone confident and purposeful. She had Victoria's compassion, but tempered with Helen's practicality, creating something uniquely her own. "Tell me about the flagship location," he said. Rachel's face lit up. "We keep Donovan's bakery exactly as it is. Helen's legacy stays intact, but we open a second location in Harlem, in that building you showed me last month. Ground floor retail, second floor classrooms for job training, third floor transitional housing for participants who need it. And you'd run this personally. Helen and I would run it together. She's got 40 years of experience with food service and managing people. Plus she understands what it's like to start over with nothing. I've got the business education and the energy to handle the expansion." Helen smiled proudly. "She's been planning this for months. You know, stayed up until 3 a.m. last night working on the employee handbook. There's something else," Rachel continued, suddenly looking nervous. "I want to create a foundation as part of this, something that helps families of missing children. Not just the children themselves, but the families who are left behind, support groups, resources for private investigators, funding for extended searches." Jonathan's breath caught. "Rachel, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. 23 years, Jonathan. 23 years of you wondering if I was alive or dead, if you'd failed me, if you could have done something different. No family should go through that alone. What would you call it?" he asked quietly. "The Victoria Blake Foundation for Missing Children and Their Families." Rachel reached across the space between them and took his hand. I may not remember her clearly, but I know she would have wanted to help other families stay together. This feels like something she would have supported. Jonathan squeezed her hand, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he managed. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become." "Both of them would be," Helen added softly. "Victoria for the compassion and vision, me for the practical planning and hard work ethic." Over the following weeks, the penthouse became an unlikely headquarters for Rachel's ambitious plans. Lawyers came and went, reviewing incorporation documents and partnership agreements. Marketing consultants presented branding strategies. Construction contractors provided estimates for renovating the Harlem building. Through it all, Rachel divided her time between her two worlds with increasing ease. Mornings belonged to the original bakery, where she worked alongside Helen and their small staff, maintaining the personal touch that had made Donovan's a neighborhood institution. Afternoons were spent in Manhattan, learning the intricacies of running a larger business, understanding legal requirements, building relationships with potential partners and suppliers. "You know," Jonathan said one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the Harlem location, "you could have asked me to set all this up for you. Use the Blake name and resources to fast-track everything." Rachel looked up from the blueprints. "That's not who I am. Helen didn't raise me to take shortcuts or rely on other people's reputations. If this is going to work, it has to be because we built something real, something sustainable, not because we leveraged your connections, even if it means working twice as hard for the same result. Especially then," Rachel smiled. "Besides, this way I know every aspect of the business inside and out. If someone asks me about food costs or labor scheduling or health department regulations, I can answer from experience, not from a consultant's report." The transformation wasn't just professional. Rachel had started spending evenings at the penthouse, not as a visitor but as someone who belonged there. She'd moved some of her clothes into her old bedroom, had begun leaving books and personal items around the apartment. The sterile showplace was slowly becoming a home again. "I have something for you," Jonathan said one Saturday morning, leading her to his study. From his desk drawer, he pulled out a small jewelry box. "This was Victoria's. I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a crescent moon studded with tiny diamonds. "She wore this every day," Jonathan explained as Rachel lifted it reverently from the box. Said it reminded her that even in darkness, there's always light if you know where to look. Rachel fastened the necklace, the pendant settling just above her heart. "It's beautiful. There's an inscription on the back," Jonathan added. Rachel turned the pendant over and read the tiny engraving. "For Olivia, my moon and stars. Love always, Mama Tori." "She had it made when you were 2, Jonathan said. "Plan to give it to you on your 16th birthday." "I'm 14 years late," Rachel said with a watery laugh. "Some gifts are worth waiting for." That afternoon, they visited Linda at Willowbrook. The older woman was having a good day, lucid and alert, though still fragile, when she saw Rachel wearing Victoria's necklace. Her face crumpled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "You look so much like her," Linda whispered. "Victoria was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, inside and out. She would be so proud of what you're doing with the bakeries and the foundation." "How did you know about that?" Rachel asked. "Surprised? Dr. Santos told me. She thought it might help me to know that something good was coming from all the pain." Linda reached out tentatively, and Rachel took her hand. "I want to contribute something." "Linda, you don't need to." "I have money," Linda interrupted. "Not much, but some. My mother left me a small inheritance before she died, and it's been sitting untouched all these years. I want to donate it to the foundation, for the families who are still searching, still hoping. Jonathan started to object, but Rachel silenced him with a look. "Are you sure?" "It's the only way I can make amends," Linda said simply. "Money can't undo what I did, but maybe it can help prevent other families from going through what we all went through." "How much are we talking about?" Rachel asked gently. $47,000, Linda replied. "I know it's not much compared to what Mr. Blake can contribute, but it's everything I have." Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. $47,000. Almost exactly the amount Linda had originally asked for in her ransom note. "It's perfect," Rachel said softly. "It's exactly what the foundation needs to get started." As they prepared to leave Willowbrook, Linda called out to Rachel one last time. "Olivia, Rachel, I need you to know something. Those 2 years we spent together, running from city to city, living in fear and sadness, they were still the best years of my life after Emma died. Taking care of you, loving you, watching you grow up. It was wrong, but it was also the only thing that kept me alive." "I know," Rachel replied. "And Linda, I'm glad you loved me, even if it was complicated, even if it caused pain. I'm glad I was loved." On the drive back to the city, Rachel was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "I want to name the first scholarship at the foundation after Emma Harper." Jonathan glanced at her in surprise. "Are you sure about that? Emma was an innocent victim too," Rachel said firmly. "If she hadn't died, none of this would have happened." Linda's grief for her daughter set everything in motion. "I think Victoria would understand that sometimes we have to honor the casualties along with the heroes." "You continue to amaze me," Jonathan said softly. "I had good teachers," Rachel replied, thinking of Helen's practical kindness, Victoria's unconditional love, and even Linda's twisted but genuine care. All of them. As Manhattan's skyline came into view, Rachel touched the crescent moon pendant at her throat and felt, for the first time since learning her true identity, completely at peace with who she was and where she'd come from. She was ready to build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. The Victoria Blake Foundation officially opened its doors on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Rachel had first heard the pocket watch's melody echoing through the empty streets of Queens. The converted brownstone in Harlem hummed with activity, construction workers putting finishing touches on the second-floor classrooms, volunteers organizing donated supplies, and reporters setting up for the afternoon press conference. Rachel stood in what would become the main bakery, watching Helen direct the installation of professional ovens with the precision of a military general. At 68, Helen had thrown herself into the project with the enthusiasm of someone half her age, insisting on personally training every new employee. "The mixer goes there, not there," Helen called out to the delivery crew. "And mind the electrical outlets. We'll need access to everything." "She's enjoying this," Jonathan observed, joining Rachel by the window. "She's in her element," Rachel agreed. 23 years of running a small neighborhood bakery, and now she gets to create something bigger. She's terrified and exhilarated at the same time. "Like someone else I know," Rachel smiled, adjusting the Victoria Blake Foundation pin on her blazer lapel. In the past year, she'd learned to navigate board meetings and budget presentations with the same confidence she brought to kneading dough, but moments like this still felt surreal. "Any word from Willowbrook?" Jonathan asked. Rachel's expression grew somber. "Dr. Santos called this morning. Linda had another episode yesterday. Tried to give away her breakfast to an imaginary child, but she's been asking about the foundation opening. In her lucid moments, she seems proud that her donation is helping make this happen. And you're still planning to visit her today. After the press conference, I promised I'd tell her how everything went." Rachel paused, watching a delivery truck pull up outside. "Jonathan, do you think I'm doing the right thing, forgiving her? I mean, some people think I should hate her for what she did." Jonathan considered the question carefully. "I spent 23 years hating her. It didn't bring you back, didn't heal my pain, didn't make anything better. But watching you choose forgiveness over anger, it's changed something in me too. Maybe the real question isn't whether she deserves forgiveness, but whether we deserve the peace that comes from letting go of hatred." Before Rachel could respond, Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically excited for the usually stoic private investigator. "Rachel, you need to see this," he said, holding out a manila folder. "I've been working on one last piece of the puzzle, and I think I found something important." Rachel opened the folder to find a series of legal documents and bank records. "What am I looking at?" "Frank Kowalski's estate papers," Marcus explained. "He died 5 years ago, but his will was held up in probate court due to some irregularities. The court finally released the documents last month. And Frank left a confession letter to be opened only after his death. He couldn't live with what he'd done, but he was too scared of the consequences to come forward while he was alive." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the letter. In Frank's own words, he admitted to intercepting Linda's ransom note, to bribing a court clerk to remove identifying information from Rachel when she was found at the church, to systematically covering up any evidence that might have led back to him. "He knew where I was the whole time," Rachel whispered. "More than that," Marcus continued, "he was monitoring the situation. He knew Helen had taken you in, knew you were safe and being cared for. He could have reunited you with your father at any point over the years, but he was too afraid of going to prison." Jonathan read over Rachel's shoulder, his jaw tightening with each revelation. 23 years of hell because one man was too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. "There's more," Marcus said gently. "Frank left instructions for his estate to be liquidated, and the proceeds donated anonymously to organizations that help missing children. He couldn't undo what he did, but he tried to make some kind of amends." "How much?" Rachel asked. $800,000. It was donated to various organizations over the past 5 years, including a significant contribution to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Rachel sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by this final piece of her story. So Linda was telling the truth. She really did try to return me. If Frank hadn't interfered, you would have come home after a few weeks," Jonathan finished. "Linda would have faced charges, probably served time in prison, but you would have grown up knowing who you were. And I never would have known Helen," Rachel pointed out. "I never would have learned to bake, never would have developed the work ethic that led to this foundation, never would have understood what it meant to rebuild your life from nothing." "You're not angry?" Marcus asked, studying her face. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information alongside everything else she'd learned about her past. Finally, she shook her head. "I'm sad. Sad for all the years we lost. Sad for Linda's unnecessary suffering. Sad for Frank's cowardice. But angry. No, anger won't give us back those years. And it won't make the future any brighter." The press conference that afternoon was a success. Local news stations covered the foundation's mission, and several city council members praised the innovative approach to job training and family support. Rachel spoke confidently about their goals, flanked by Helen and Jonathan, representing the unique coalition that had made the project possible. "The Victoria Blake Foundation exists because of love that transcends loss," Rachel told the assembled reporters. "My mother Victoria loved me enough to fight for extra time with me. My mother Helen loved me enough to give me a home when I had none. And yes, even Linda Harper loved me in her broken way, enough to make sure I was safe when she couldn't care for me anymore. This foundation is proof that love, even complicated love, can create something beautiful." After the cameras stopped rolling and the last reporter left, Rachel, Helen, and Jonathan stood alone in the foundation's main room, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd built together. "Victoria would be so proud," Helen said softly, looking at the plaque by the entrance that bore Victoria's photo and the inscription, "In memory of Victoria Blake, who believed love was the most powerful force for healing in the world. So would Emma Harper," Rachel added, gesturing to a smaller plaque nearby, honoring Linda's daughter, and maybe even Linda herself in her own way. As evening approached, Rachel made the drive to Willowbrook alone. She found Linda in the common room, staring out at the gardens where autumn leaves drifted slowly to the ground. Linda's face lit up when she saw Rachel approach. "How did it go?" Linda asked, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "The opening? It was perfect," Rachel said, sitting beside her. "We had reporters there, city officials, community leaders. Everyone was excited about what we're trying to accomplish. And the scholarship for Emma? The Emma Harper Memorial Scholarship for Children of Single Parents. It will help dozens of kids get the education and opportunities they need." Rachel pulled out her phone and showed Linda photos from the day. "Look, we put her picture right next to the description of the scholarship program." Linda stared at the photo of her daughter, 4 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, frozen forever in innocent joy. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. She would have been 34 this year, Linda whispered. Maybe married, maybe with children of her own. I think about that sometimes. The grandchildren I'll never meet. The life that got cut short because I made one careless mistake. But now her memory is helping other children, Rachel said gently. The scholarship will exist long after we're all gone. Emma's name will be associated with hope and opportunity instead of just tragedy. Thank you, Linda said, taking Rachel's hand, for forgiving an old woman who made terrible choices, for letting something good come from all the pain. Thank you for loving me when I needed it most, Rachel replied. Even if it was the wrong kind of love at the wrong time, it was still love, and it kept me safe until I could find my way back to where I belonged. As Rachel prepared to leave, Linda called out to her one last time. Rachel, Olivia, whoever you are now, live a beautiful life. Live the life I stole from you, but live it better than I ever could have given you. Be happy, be useful, be loved. That's all any mother really wants for her child. I will, Rachel promised. I am. Driving back to the city, Rachel felt the weight of her journey settling into something like peace. The girl who had been stolen was gone forever, but the woman who had emerged from that loss was stronger, more compassionate, more determined to make a difference in the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Proud of you today. Mom would be too. And for the first time, Rachel knew exactly which mom he meant, and that both of them would indeed be proud of the woman she'd become. 2 years later, Rachel Donovan Blake stood in the rooftop garden of the Manhattan penthouse, her hands deep in rich soil as she tended to Victoria's restored rose garden. The white roses were in full bloom now, their fragrance carrying on the warm June breeze like a blessing. Below her, Central Park stretched green and vibrant, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of children playing. The Harlem location hit its 18-month profitability target 3 months early. Jonathan called from the terrace doors, his voice filled with pride as he reviewed the monthly reports. And the Brooklyn site is ahead of projections, too. Helen will be insufferable when she hears that. Rachel laughed, not looking up from the roses. She's already talking about opening a 4th location in the Bronx. At 70. She has more energy than people half her age. Rachel straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and turned to look at her father. The past 2 years had been good to Jonathan Blake. The lines around his eyes came from laughter now instead of grief, and he'd started taking actual vacations instead of just working constantly. More importantly, he'd learned to be present, really present, for the life they were building together. She does, Rachel agreed. Yesterday she spent 6 hours teaching our newest trainee how to properly fold croissant dough. The poor girl was exhausted, but Helen wouldn't let her stop until she got it right. Sounds familiar, Jonathan said with a knowing look. Someone else I know has been known to be a perfectionist about pastry. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text, and her expression grew somber as she read it. That was Dr. Santos. Linda passed away this morning. Jonathan moved to stand beside her, his hand finding her shoulder. I'm sorry, sweetheart. How do you feel about that? Rachel was quiet for a moment, processing the news. Over the past 2 years, she'd visited Linda regularly, watching the older woman's mental state deteriorate, but also witnessing moments of surprising clarity and peace. Linda's donation to the foundation had grown through careful investment into a substantial endowment that would fund scholarships for decades to come. Sad, but also relieved, I think, Rachel said finally. She's been suffering for so long, living with the guilt and the confusion. Maybe now she can finally rest. Dr. Santos said she was asking for you yesterday, in one of her lucid moments. What did she want? Jonathan pulled out his phone and scrolled to a voice message. She recorded something for you. Linda's voice came through the speaker, weak but clear. Rachel, my dear girl, if you're hearing this, then I've finally gone to join Emma. I want you to know that these past 2 years, knowing you forgave me, knowing that my Emma's name is helping other children, it's been the first peace I've known since she died. You gave an old woman the gift of redemption. Thank you for that. Live beautifully, my darling. Live for all of us. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of completion, of a circle finally closed. There's something else, Jonathan continued gently. Linda left instructions for her burial. She wants to be cremated, and she wants her ashes scattered in the foundation's garden, next to the memorial plaque for Emma. She wants to come home, Rachel said softly. In a way, yes. That afternoon, Rachel found herself at the original Donovan's bakery, working beside Helen in comfortable silence as they prepared the next day's inventory. The small shop had become the heart of their expanding empire, unchanged in its essential character, but now serving as the training ground for their social enterprise program. "You're thinking about Linda," Helen observed, not looking up from the bread dough she was kneading. "How do you do that? 30 years of reading your moods, sweetie? Plus you get that same expression whenever you're processing something big?" Helen's hands never stopped working the dough. "What are you feeling?" "Grateful," Rachel said, surprising herself with the answer. "For all of it, even the painful parts. Because everything that happened, Victoria's death, the kidnapping, Linda's mental illness, Frank's cowardice, even the years of not knowing who I was, all of it led to this moment. This life, this work we're doing. That's a very mature way to look at it. You taught me that. You taught me that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control what we do with what happens to us." Helen smiled, her eyes misting slightly. "Your mother Victoria taught you about unconditional love. I taught you about resilience, and even Linda, in her broken way, taught you about the power of forgiveness. And Frank taught me that cowardice has consequences that ripple through generations." "Exactly." Helen shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "Every person who touched your life, for better or worse, contributed to who you are today. And who you are today is someone who's making the world a little bit better." That evening, the foundation held its monthly family support meeting, a gathering for parents and siblings of missing children. Led by Rachel and a team of counselors, the group had grown from 8 people to over 30 in the past year, and Rachel had watched many of them transform from desperate, broken individuals into sources of strength and hope for others facing similar tragedies. "I want to read something tonight," Rachel said as the meeting began. "A letter I received this week from Maria Santos in Phoenix." She unfolded the handwritten note and began to read. "Dear Ms. Donovan Blake, I wanted you to know that your foundation helped bring my daughter home. Not physically. Elena is still missing after 3 years. But emotionally, spiritually, your support group taught me that I could honor my missing child by helping other families, instead of just drowning in grief. I've started a scholarship fund in Elena's name, and I volunteer with the local search and rescue team. Elena always wanted to help people, and now she's helping people through me. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't end when someone disappears. It just finds new ways to shine." The room was quiet as Rachel finished reading, several people wiping away tears. "This is why we do this work," Rachel continued. "Not just to find the missing, though we never stop hoping for those miracles, but to help the people left behind discover that they can survive the unthinkable and even find ways to create meaning from their pain." After the meeting, Rachel walked slowly back to the penthouse, taking the long route through Central Park. The summer evening was perfect, warm but not humid, the kind of night that made New York City feel like a small town instead of a sprawling metropolis. Her phone rang as she entered the park. It was Helen. "I just got the most interesting call," Helen said without preamble. "From a woman in Seattle whose daughter has been missing for 6 months. She wants to know if we'd consider opening a foundation branch there. Seattle's a long way from home." That's what I told her. But then she said something that made me think. She said, "Pain doesn't recognize geography. If you can help families in New York, why not families everywhere?" Rachel found herself at the Bethesda fountain, where families with young children were feeding ducks in the fading daylight. She watched a father lift his toddler daughter onto his shoulders, both of them laughing as the ducks fought over breadcrumbs. "What are you thinking?" she asked Helen. "I'm thinking that maybe it's time to dream bigger. National expansion, regional coordinators, a whole network of support centers. We've proven the model works. Maybe we owe it to all the missing children and their families to scale up. That would mean leaving New York sometimes. It would mean bringing New York with us, taking what we've learned here and sharing it with people who need it just as much as we did." Rachel smiled, watching the father and daughter disappear into the crowd of evening joggers and dog walkers. "Victoria would have loved that idea. Both your mothers would have." as Rachel continued toward home. Her steps were lighter than they'd been all day. She pulled out the pocket watch and pressed the small button that triggered its melody. But tonight, the haunting notes didn't sound like a lament for what was lost. They sounded like a promise of what was still possible. At the penthouse, she found Jonathan on the terrace, reading by the light of the garden lanterns among Victoria's roses. He looked up as she approached, and she saw in his face the same contentment she felt in her own heart. "Good meeting tonight?" he asked. "The best yet. Helen thinks we should go national with the foundation." "And what do you think?" Rachel settled into the chair beside him, breathing in the perfume of the white roses that had survived death, abandonment, and years of neglect to bloom again. "I think," she said slowly, "that some stories are too important to keep to ourselves." The pocket watch in her hand chimed midnight, its melody floating across the garden like a blessing, like a promise, like love itself made audible in the darkness. And for the first time in 25 years, Rachel Olivia Donovan Blake felt completely, perfectly, unshakably home.